The first and most obvious question is, what is the origin of your involvement with making the documentary, and what's your connection to André?
André and I had done, I'd worked in advertising together. He was a creative director and a writer, and he would hire me to direct a lot of his projects. Every André project was just as insane as he is. You never knew if you were going to get arrested or break bones. I actually did break a bone on the making of André Is an Idiot, and so did Lee, but that's a different story. But anyways, yeah, I met him, just early on because he would hire me to direct. And at one point I'd asked him, why do you hire me to direct your projects? And he said, because you're not afraid to jump fences when we need to get the shot, maybe bend the rules a little bit. So we became fast friends on those journeys,
You picked the perfect guy. So much of André's life seems accidental, his marriage, his career, even his children. In that sense, what becomes the absurdity of trying to control anything in life in accordance with the example of his life?
See, I think that André obviously lived his life with irreverence. Every choice he made, these big choices in life that we all would put a lot of reverence towards, like getting married, getting a job, buying a house, having children. André, approached the opposite way. And I think that to André, giving anything too much reverence was the absurd. So, when he would look at the rest of society, he would think, why do you care so much about your job? Or, why are you putting so much weight on your marriage? Or, why are you stressing out about your marriage? Just go get married, If people, when he got his stage 4 colon cancer diagnosis, I think he obviously treated that the same way. And I think in his mind, he thought, I don't understand why people make such a big deal out of this. It's just part of life.
Okay, in many examples, André seemed at times like a difficult person with some significant addiction issues. What makes somebody like this a better advice giver on facing death than the more straight-laced or religious types, in your observation?
I think André was better suited to give advice for end of life because he had lived fully, taking risks all the way through. And I think when you live fully, you aren't as afraid to die. And I really do believe that André was not afraid to die. I think what scared him more was just hurting the people around him, seeing his daughters and his wife sad. That was the only thing he was really afraid of. But it's that idea of memento mori in a way, not just that he's considering his death, but when you think about your death and you do consider that, you tend to live a richer, more full life. And I think André lived a very full life. I don't think he regretted much. He did regret not getting his colonoscopy. And, I'd say the only other thing he really sort of regretted that he told me was he regretted spending a lot of his days in advertising. But I think you'll see in the film that, he has a redemption for that, and he comes up with a clever solve to die without that regret.
Famous Swiss psychiatrist Elisabeth Kubler-Ross once described the 5 stages of terminal illness: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. As you observed André through the filming, which of these stages do you believe he took on most noticeably, and how did he get through that particular stage?
Yeah, it's funny, when we first started the film, I actually thought we would use these as chapters.
Interesting.
Watching my grandmother go through this and watching, 3 people in my life pass away of cancer, I figured we'd be going through these stages like normal people, but André's not normal. You find out very quickly in the film. He's not your average Joe. And so I feel like André basically stayed in denial all the way through until maybe the very last few days. And then I think he finally went through acceptance. I'll never forget, there's a thing called the advance directive that you're supposed to fill out this paperwork that sort of, gives people, your loved ones, an idea of what you want done with your remains, and it's kind of those final tasks for people, but it's your final wishes. And he would never fill it out. And I kept interviewing him, putting the paperwork in front of him, and he just said, I don't. And finally, this is just about a week or 2 before he passed away. I said, why don't you fill it out? I've asked you, a dozen times in interviews. He goes, I don't know. I feel like if I fill that out, I'm admitting that I'm dying.
Interesting.
And I said, have you looked in the mirror? And it was one of those moments where I'm looking at this man who he obviously is not doing well, but yet at the same point he's still in denial in a way. But I will say the last few weeks I do think he began to accept what was going on, and that's when he really had to come to terms with
the coda you have in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, he never really got angry. Bargaining was not a thing he would do because he wasn't much of a believer in any sort of afterlife, and I'm not sure if that's where bargaining is, but
it's sort of like that.
Fits in there. Depression, he just wasn't him. He just wasn't going to sit there and sulk, and he wasn't going to wallow in self-pity. At one point, we thought, I joked with him, and I said, I think you're rewriting the stages of grief. I think you went from denial to humor to finally a little bit of acceptance. Those were André's stages of grief.
Many people use belief in a deity as a bargaining chip during an illness, yet André seemed to have no interest in it. Did he ever mention the deity or religion as something he needed to come to terms with, or was he a pure agnostic or atheist?
André was an outspoken atheist, but I will say that he was searching for some sort of meaning in what was happening to him. And so, a lot of scenes you don't see in the film are that he wanted to go do 9 grams of mushrooms, which he did. That's supposed to help prepare you to maybe to cross over, but also to sort of give you a little bit of ego death and maybe connect you with something beyond. Ayahuasca, he did that. And when he did that, it was actually before his diagnosis, but he had told me that he felt that he had met the creators of the universe while he was on ayahuasca. So I think he had a little bit of something in there, but it was very hippy-dippy in that way where, it fit André. The last thing was we went up to a weed farm in Mendocino and talked to this...
As one does,
to this old guru up there, Swami.
Awesome.
And... they had this really intellectual conversation about Buddha and, the idea of, and Ganesh and the idea of maybe multiple lives. And André said, I feel like this was the life where if I was going to have one meaningful life out of the many that I've supposedly have had, this was the one. And I feel like I might have messed it up. And I'll never forget the Swami said, well, you're not dead yet. And this was at the beginning of André's journey.
Wow.
And so I remember André, he lit up when that was said because, the truth was there. You still have some time. And I do feel that in the last few years of André's life, he did find a lot of that. He did find that connection to life, love, vulnerability, all the things I think he was searching for.
The relationship with a parent is often complex and unfulfilling once a person reaches their own adulthood. What was behind the idea for André to connect with his father one last time and then to use a surrogate in the actual filming? When we first started the film, André wanted it to just be really him and Lee together. About 6 months in, I said, I think we really need to broaden this story structure. Can we interview your wife? Can we interview the kids? And, I sort of started to unpeel the onions of who André is and how he became the man that we meet in the film. And along that path, I really wanted to interview his parents because I wanted to know more about his childhood. Luckily, his brother was available for a day, and we got some great stuff from his brother. But his father is so private that he, it's just something he really would never do or never want to do. I was told that he's so private that he wouldn't even let a pizza be delivered at his own address. Gotcha.
And so he's not going to go on a film.
No.
And then André's mother, unfortunately, she had dementia, and she's still here, but it was just we weren't able to interview her, obviously, because she wasn't quite aware of what was going on.
Right.
And so at one point I had bothered André so much about getting his father involved. I said, come on, you've got to be able to talk him into it. It's your dad. And André kind of said, fine, well, you know what? I'm just going to find someone to play my father. And it was a crazy idea. And if you want to know his first pick, he first said, how about Obama? But then he said, Obama's probably a little young. And then we landed on his second pick, which I don't want to spoil anything, but you'll find in the film.
Yeah, okay. As you observed and highlighted the persons around André, which of them had the most unlikely reaction in your observation after André died, given what you knew about them during the filming?
They never did a service or anything. We did more of a party, like a celebration of life. And that was after a film festival, so it was a pretty
so you didn't really get
joyful event. No, but I do have a story I could tell. I think that André in those 3.5 years really set us all up to accept that he may not be there one day. I really feel that even his relationship with Lee as his best friend, he sort of set Lee and I up as best friends. Lee and I are now very close. And I think André sort of masterminded all of these relationships. That if he's going to leave, he's going to leave everyone in good hands. which is really beautiful. But I will say that after he passed, I was a little worried because everybody was mourning that we weren't going to keep up that humor of André's. That I just wanted to keep that humor and that spirit alive, and I was worried that might start to wane. But a week or two after he passed, Janice sent us a text, and it had a photo of a velvet bag sitting on a passenger seat of a car, and in the background you could see the crematorium, and she said, "Worst errand ever." And at first I didn't know how to react, so I was sitting there trying different texts, and I'm sure the three dots just kept playing over and over. I'm like, what do I say? And then she said, "Should I put his seatbelt on?" And then I knew that she'd cut it with a joke, and so I replied, "Safety first, I guess." And then everybody jumped in and had a laugh, and I love that moment because it showed that we were carrying André's humor. We were carrying the torch of André's humor even through this very difficult time.
One of the theories of the subconscious and when you're dreaming is that it is those who are in the astral plane visiting you. Have you had a dream about André, and can you remember what was involved in it?
I have had a dream about André. It was a while back, and it was interesting. I remember I wrote Janice a text about it a day or two later, but in the dream, André seemed really happy. And he didn't really know what was going on with the film, so I started filling him in on the details of how well the film had done and how it had gone to Sundance and we'd won the audience award, and that I was on this tour, and that people were saying that they were really excited to meet him after, that they really wanted to know more about him, and that family members were saying they felt like they got to spend 90 minutes with André when they had watched the movie. And André was just glowing in this stream. He had this big smile, and he was laughing and joking the way that André would. But it was almost like he was so irreverent. He was just like, "Oh, that's great," But it wasn't like the main thing he was concerned about. But I did feel in that dream that he was okay for some reason. So that's what came across.
Beautiful. Finally, there are many pieces of media and religious types who advise on the ways to die, but André's way seemed the most accessible and sensible to me. What lessons of mortality did you learn from his approach that will stay with you until you pass?
I think André teaches us it's okay to be unapologetically yourself through life and through death. It's live how you want to live, die how you want to die. You don't need to. There's no set rules for this, right? It's part of our life. We're all going to go through this. I think that's something we tend to forget, is that we don't consider our mortality on a daily basis. As I was saying earlier, that idea of memento mori. I think that if we do consider our mortality more, and André opens that conversation and opens that idea in the film to the audience, that we'll live a richer life. And also it'll strip the fear. Communicating and talking about our sicknesses and death and vulnerabilities really can strip the fear out of it for the person going through it and for the people around them, right? So I've been saying, that cheesy line of, laughter is the best medicine, but what I've realized is it's not just the best medicine for the patient, it's the best medicine for everyone around them, the doctors, the family, the friends. If you can laugh about these things, if you can talk about these things, it takes the power away from them in a way, and it allows us to just land in a more accepting place.
This is Patrick McDonald for HollywoodChicago.com. Copyright 2026.